You're listening to episode 59 with Steve Stansberry.
Welcome to the Gemba Academy podcast, the show that's focused on helping individuals and companies achieve breakthrough results using the same continuous improvement principles leveraged by companies such as Toyota, Del Monte, and the U.S. Department of Defense. And now, here's your host, Ron Pereira.
Hey there, this is Ron Pereira with Gemba Academy, and I'd like to welcome you to another edition of the Gemba Academy podcast. As always, thank you so much for taking time out of your day and your week to listen to the show and for watching our Lean and Six Sigma training videos over at GembaAcademy.com. Now, one quick plug for Gemba Academy. If you're not a customer of ours and you're interested in checking out our more than 700 Lean and Six Sigma training videos, which do include something called Gemba Live, which is where we go into companies and we actually spend a day or two with them and kind of really feature them in a sort of a case study. And you'd like to check that out for free, no strings attached, go over to GembaAcademy.com and sign up for a 3-day trial. Again, it's free. There's no strings attached. We'll follow back up with you to see if you have any questions. But if it doesn't look like it's a good fit for you, no sweat. But that's really our best sales tool, is just to let folks kind of check out the content free of charge and see what they think for themselves. Now, with that said, on today's episode, we are going to talk to a gentleman named Steve Stansberry. Now, Steve Kane, who's Gemba Academy's Director of Sales and Marketing, recently ran into Steve Stansberry at a AME regional conference, and the two started chatting, and Steve Kane said, gosh, you really need a podcast with Ron. And so Steve Stansberry and myself kind of reached out and connected and got to talking a little bit, and Steve's got a really incredible story and background. He's been practicing Lean for over 23 years and he's worked for a number of different companies, and he kind of specializes in what he calls kind of a lean startup, not to be confused with the lean startup movement of Eric Ries, but more of a how to get a company kind of thinking and practicing lean. And so that's really what we talk about in this episode, is some of the things that he's seen that have worked well for him and the companies that he's worked at that worked, and then also maybe some things that didn't work. And so all of us are more than likely on the lean journey to some extent. So I think hearing from someone like Steve is super valuable. Now, show notes for this episode can be found over at gembapodcast.com/59. And that's 59 for 59. So gembapodcast.com/59. All right, enough from me. Let's get to the show. All right, Steve. Well, thank you so much for taking time to come on to the show. Where are you calling in from today?
Well, Ron, I'm calling in from Oklahoma City, Oklahoma.
All right. Very good. Well, it's pretty close to us. We're here in Keller, Texas. So good times. All right. Well, Steve, let's go ahead and just start the show with you telling us a little bit about your background, how you first came to learn about continuous improvement, and then what you're up to these days.
Sure. I started my career back in the early 90s at Rutledge. I hooked up with General Motors after bouncing around for a couple of years. And that's where I really got to put my degree to work as an industrial engineer. And I really focused on the classic industrial engineering, time studies, line balance, layout, redesign, so on and so forth. And I did that for 6 or 7 years with them. At that time, I was a future program engineer. And as we know, anyone who's worked in automotive, all roads lead through Detroit. And ultimately, I ended up on the future program of the Cadillac CTS and then the variants that go with it. I got the great opportunity to get on that future program, and that's when GM was really trying to revive the Cadillac brand, and they want to do so by building the best car design in North America, built in the best plant design in North America. So I was immersed immediately into benchmarking and learning about Toyota production system, what GM had done in Europe and South America and China. And I also was introduced to the theory of constraint. And up to that point, as a traditional IE, I found myself kind of not fitting in, but this really resonated with me, and it really took off, and I just started absorbing everything. And when I went to deploy what I learned, I found that as I designed the assembly plant, which was a terrific experience, maybe the best of my career, I really got to learn about the systems that ran inside it. And I saw that program through to a year after launch, and At that point, I felt like I was ready to spread my wings, and I took off to some other companies, and I had, we'll say I've been around the block, and a lot of failed experiments, and I've learned a lot from those, and it's made me into what I am today. And at this point now, I'm running the operational excellence initiatives for a great little company here in Oklahoma City, and having a great time, and everything I had learned in my past 20 years. I picked a company that was right, that had the right fit for me and what I was looking to do. So I'm taking everything I learned and applying it and having a great time.
All right. Very good. All right. Well, Steve, what we like to do, as you know, to start all of our shows is have our guests share a quotation, maybe a leadership or lean related quotation that inspires them. So do you have a quotation that inspires you?
Yeah, and this is going to resonate with a lot of people. T.G. Otis is famous for saying a lot of great things, and I couldn't really find anything that was truly inspirational. But I found a quote that resonates with me, and it keeps me steady. T.G. Otis said that all we're doing is looking at the timeline from the moment the customer gives us an order to the point we collect the cash, and we are reducing the timeline by reducing non-value added waste. And to me, that centers me, especially when you get wrapped up in emotional issues and problems, and the data is not clear, and you got a lot of organizational inertia looking at what are their goals and what are we trying to do. Well, it's ultimately all about time, and everything is subservient to time, right? So when the customer, when we have problems in a plant, on the line, in the office, whatever those problems do, they rob us of time, which ultimately costs us money, and those problems are defined by 7 forms of waste. But ultimately, it's about time, and when we focus ourselves on compressing time, the flow time of the process, we're really becoming customer centric and looking at this system as a whole, which is what we really want to do. We want to improve our systems, not just the processes.
Now, one question I have for you on that, Steve. So some practitioners, lean practitioners, will get a little bit bent out of shape when people are saying, "Oh, lean's all about time," and something like Six Sigma is about quality. Obviously, that's wrong. I mean, lean is very focused on quality. So, how do you reconcile that? You think with that quotation that Mr. Ono was saying?
As far as Six Sigma being related to quality?
I mean, not just Six Sigma, just how some people will think that lean is not, their quality is not a part of lean, which obviously it is. I mean, it's a huge part.
Well, when you think about quality, if you just it as a customer focused problem, whether it's internal scrap or rework or a warranty call, that takes time and money and resources out of our pocket, right? Yeah. So you have to do it over, or you have to fix it, or you have to satisfy the customer with a replacement, and that robs us of time. All right? So exactly. So it's a struggle, and Six Sigma is a very effective tool as part of the system. So
yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
Very good. All right. So what we're going to talk about today, Steve, is kind of, well, I guess we're calling it kind of lean startups, not to be confused with the lean startup movement of Eric Ries with kind of starting up a company, if you will. But this is more about implementing lean, bringing a lean thinking way of working to an organization. So let's just start with just a real general question. In your past experiences with all of the startups that you've done, where do you think most lean startups fail?
Well, where I've seen them fail, in my experience, and lean becomes a secondary agenda to running the business. You can't do lean. In fact, I cringe when I hear other OpEx professionals use that phrase, because that signals to me that it's become a secondary agenda to running the business. And that's a struggle, because what that does is it puts all the pressure and all the ownership on the OpEx professional, which is kind of nice. You like having that responsibility, but that's really a recipe for disaster. What you want to do is have lean integrated into the way we do business. Therefore, it's not a secondary system requiring another set of resources or in a conflict of priorities, for instance. So, we can either implement 5S or standard work, or we can go fix our quality. And when you have to make that decision between running a business and doing lean, and then you're in trouble, because when you run out of resources, they're going to go towards running the business and not towards managing the operational excellence system, and that's a problem.
Yeah, I love that. So it's like practice lean as a way to help you run your business. So it's like, yes. No, that's beautifully said. So it's almost like we were talking earlier, like 5S, somebody wants to do 5S, but why? Why are you doing it, right? What problem are you trying to solve?
Exactly. In fact, I've always had a sensei when I would say, hey, the problem here is we don't have standardized work. And he'd say, what you have is a solution in search of our problem. What is the problem you're trying to solve? solve. And when you solve that problem, then you deploy the tool to help you solve that problem. Therefore, you've solved the problem.
Beautiful. I love
Yep.
it. I love it. All right. So, Steve, what do you think is the most critical component to a lean startup?
Well, you got the house of Toyota with all the tools and all the subsystems, but ultimately it comes down to executive commitment. The leadership of the business, the leadership of the business unit of the organization, they have to be committed to the journey, and they have to make it part of their daily work. If they don't do that, then no one, because we all know that we do the 10 things our boss wants the most, and when it's not his number one priority, then it's not our number one priority. So you have to have the executives on board, and I know that's a struggle for a lot of professionals because they're in the opposite approach where they're trying to sell their leadership the program, and they're struggling with it, and they wonder why they're not getting the results. So I feel for those folks, but that's just a lesson learned over time that you've got to have them on board. They have to be leading it. That you have to be in their hip pocket, and they have to be leading it. Secondly, I've found that not only do you have to have the executives on board, but you have to have 3 in a row. And that's something I learned early. If you've got a breakdown in the command chain, then your system is vulnerable. So what we like to say is that, do you have 3 leaders any point in the command chain that are committed to the purpose? Then if you do, then you're going to be successful in that area. So if you had a CEO, VP of operations, and plant manager, that plant's going to be successful. You've got a team leader, a supervisor, and a production manager, that area of the plant's going to be successful. So you always want to have 3 in a row, and that's where I always tend to focus my launches on, is where are you going to be successful based on the leadership you have, because they're the ones that are going to have to do the work and carry out execute the process.
So is it safe to say that if you go into an area and you have 2 and you need a third, do you just do your best to get a third before you start?
Yeah, yes, you'd want to. It's kind of a chicken and egg thing. You want, if you've got 3 in a row, 3 good leaders, you go there, or you want to seek them out. And typically, if you've got some influential people, you can get that third on. But that's where I've been successful. You've had 3 leaders in a row, whether it be at a plant or be in a section of a plant or be in a business. It's always worked out that way for me.
No, I love that. I've actually never heard that before, but it makes total sense. So that's really good.
Yes.
So
yes.
Now, one thing I want to kind of revisit, though, you talked about the importance of leadership. So let's face the tough question. So there's somebody listening to this right now saying, "Yeah, that's fantastic, Steve. Yeah, I wish I had leadership that was behind me." But this practitioner, he or she, maybe they don't, but they're still driving it. What advice do you have for that person? Should they just quit, get their resume polished up, or what do you think?
I was at a conference and those questions kind of came up, and I'd look these folks in the eye and they could see that they knew they're in trouble. And that one I don't have an answer for, because every situation is going to be unique. But I tell you, what you've got to do is try to stay away from them as far as tools go, and try to go for business systems approach. If anybody's heard of that, Kata, the way we solve problems, the way we organize, the way we go about to the floor, and I'll go into that in a little bit, about what we want to see as far as systems. And if you can get those systems in place and integrate the business cycle, then you've got a better shot. Because what the lean leader's got to do is create a pull for his or her services, and not a push. And when you're pushing, at some point you're going to become a nuisance, and management's not going to want you, and they're going to get rid of you. But what you want to say is, hey, Steve, we need your help. We're trying to solve this business problem. How can you help us with this? And then you've got an in. So integrating lean into the business cycle really helps pave that way, and then you might be able to change some minds from those above.
Yeah, got it. All right. So obviously, having leadership behind us, having the philosophy, understanding why we're doing this is very important to get going. But now, there is a place and a time for tools. So what are the most important tools to begin that lean conversion? Yeah,
and that's a great segue, because I've always said, if I think about the 3 tools that I want, if I could have any 3 tools and just 3 tools, I'd want Hoshin Kanri or policy deployment, I'd want A3 thinking or problem solving, and then daily management or managing for daily improvement. I'd want those tools because those are the foundations for it to launch every other tool in the toolbox. So if I could explain them for a moment, like the Hoshin Kanri, and I talked about in the previous question, how do we integrate into the business system? Well, policy deployment is merely, what is my business plan for this year? What is my long range, my short range plans? And if I can develop a plan identified by gaps in the business, then I create a burning platform to make improvements, right? So if you want to increase EBITDA, or if we want to drive down quality, or we want to improve safety, or improve productivity, or reduce material costs, now you've got a gap and you can rally around that. Then they say, well, how do we solve these problems? Well, then the OpEx professionals say, hey, I got a tool for that, right? So that's critical. A3 thinking is just your problem-solving methodology. It's your scientific method, and problem solving is just a degree of granularity from A3 thinking that by understanding what the problem is, understanding the root cause of the problem, and then identifying the appropriate sourcing those countermeasures through timing and people, and you start solving those problems. And ultimately, you need at many levels of the organization some sort of daily management that is a standards-based initiative that makes problems visible and brings people together to talk about and solve those problems. If you can do that, then every other tool will come into play, and it'll become obvious that, say, hey, out of this extrusion work cell, we're finding that the schedules change and we're doing twice as many changeovers. Well, we get our productivity up because we have to shorten that time span getting our product to the customer. Well, that's a perfect segue for a tool like SMED to come into play. So then these systems promote the tool usage down below.
Yeah, got it. So what's your opinion on kind of some of these lean roadmaps that you'll see out there? What are your thoughts on that?
Well, as a good student, I studied that, and I can never get that system resonate with me, because what it typically does, and I've looked at roadmaps, and they typically follow the same guidelines through how do we develop 5S and going through standardized work. Well, the problem is that you make operational excellence a secondary system to the business process. If you're lucky, you can kind of mold that into the business plan and say, hey, we're going to focus the roadmap on this value stream. But again, what we end up having is a solution of a problem, right? We're going to go do 5S, and surely with the organization we'll become more efficient, right? And I struggle with that, because again, you put the pressure on the OpEx professional to not be the sensei, the coach, but to be the doer of the work and the project manager. And like any good manager, you're going to come with some organized flow of the project with timing and resources, and you forget the whole reason why you're doing is to solve problem base. Another example, kind of a microcosm of the roadmap, is the model cell. And I've been part of a couple model cells. And the great thing about a model cell is it shows off all the tools in all their glory. However, at some point you're implementing tools that aren't solving problems, and the people on the floor who are the most important users of these tools don't understand why they have these tools. They can't connect them, and typically the answer you get is because the management's making us do it, which is not the answer you want when you're out on the floor helping them solve problems.
Yeah. Got it. So the last question I have for you in this section, Steve, is just we've talked a lot about lean leadership and the importance of them, but what's their role in this whole conversion process?
Yeah, their role is when you got into this profession, you said, boy, being the sensei, how do I be a sensei? How do I be a coach? And we never end up getting there. But you've got to be the coach. You got to step away from the process. In my experience, I found myself in organizations that didn't have a lot of bench strength, and they were in some sort of distress. So I was usually as far as lean goes, the smartest guy in a room and the only person capable of making the change. So I not only came up with the good ideas, I had to implement them. And then again, that becomes Steve's lean program, not the business's lean program, and that's a problem. So what the lean leader's got to be, he's got to be the coach, he's got to be the mentor, and he's got to be the owner of the leadership behavioral process, not the owner of the tool. Does that make sense? So I pondered on this for a little while, and I really couldn't come up with a succinct way to do it. But you've got to resist the notion to come up with the answers, but you've got to drive what behaviors are we looking for in this system? How do the leaders behave in the system? How do the followers behave in this system? And then when the tools are deployed, then managing those behaviors within the processes and the tools.
Yeah, I mean, I think a big part of it for me is having the courage as a leader to grant autonomy and just kind of let go a little bit.
Absolutely,
it's so hard, though, right?
Right. Well, the professionals like us that we're trained to see waste and trained to see problems, and through our experience, we have all kinds of solutions that fit. And being patient and resisting the urge urge to give the answer is counterintuitive to our nature, certainly in our culture and in North America, that we answers, we want to be the hero, but sitting back and watching and coaching behaviors is counterintuitive to the way we've been raised.
Yeah, exactly. All right, very good. Well, all right, Steve, well, let's go ahead now and transition into what we're calling the reflection section. And so, as you know, within the kind of the Toyota model, we spend a lot of time talking about the two pillars: respect for people and continuous improvement. Continuous improvement, we can put our fingers on it. It's the tools, it's One Piece Flow, Jidoka, these sorts of things. But respect for people, man, that can be really hard to kind of define. So what does respect for people mean to you, Steve?
Well, respect for people is something that resonated with me early in my career when I realized that we all went to work for the same reason. And I found that having a meaningful job and being able to contribute was really important. Ultimately, came before I learned about the Toyota production system, so it just really fit my eye. And this is with an example. I was facilitating a Kaizen event, and during the preparation phase, we were mapping out the process, and we came across this part of the process where the finished goods and the bill of material weren't in the system correctly. And what it created was a process where the scheduler would have to go in, work around the system, create work orders outside the system, and then immediately close them, like literally seconds later, to account for the inventory usage. And she would spend 4 hours a day opening and closing work orders because they didn't have a good process to do so. And that was, I found that disrespectful to her because, you think about it, she comes home after a long day of work and her spouse says, "Hey, how's work, honey?" And her response is, "I don't know. I just did some stuff," right? Yeah. And ultimately, I think is that the as leaders, are those the types of jobs you want to provide for employees where they feel like they don't have they're just doing stuff to keep busy? And so, whenever we design a solution, we want to make sure that it includes a way to engage people in the ownership and improvement of the business, that they feel like they're part of that and they have a say and they have value and they know they're adding value and their input is valued. So, when we put in, like an improved cell, we want to make sure we have visual communication devices to help teams come together and help these folks contribute. And to me, that's respect for people. It's not just a safety thing, keeping people safe. It's not just a pay scale, making sure people are paid competitive, but people I found that people value a good job over a high pay. And typically, if they're demanding higher pay, it's because they don't value their job the way they should.
Yeah, something we've recently explored in our Culture of Kaizen course is the difference between intrinsic motivation and extrinsic motivation. Extrinsic with a carrot, it only works, it's not very effective, right? But when people have that intrinsic motivation, then, you can conquer the world, right?
Sure,
and,
absolutely.
People believe that. So, all right. Hey,
right.
Steve, what's the best advice you've ever received?
Well, as I went up through leadership, I had a mentor who was also my manager and terrific guy, and he always had pithy comments for me. But one thing that really resonated for me, and this isn't really necessarily about lean, but it's about leadership, is he said, "Beware the shadow that you cast as a leader." And what that meant to me was that, as a leader, you're always being watched, and you need to carry yourself in a professional way, and everything you do is selling yourself or demotivating others on a negative side. So, that just really sticks with me, and everything I do as a leader, I carry a burden that I take ownership for the workforce, that I need to be here to help these folks improve the business, that always be aware that people are always watching you, yourself in a professional adult way, that they can see that, hey, that's the way I want to be, and that type of behavior is contagious.
Love it. Do you have a personal productivity habit that others might benefit from?
Well, I'm kind of hard on myself, but I found myself to be generally disorganized. So I've created.
At least you're honest.
At least I'm honest. So one thing I keep with me a journal every day, and I start my day off with going through my calendar for the day, and I go through my journal of things that I need to do that day, and I try to spend 15 to 30 minutes every day getting myself ready for that day and lining up my day and making sure I've got time to prepare for my activities, time to execute my activities, and then time to reflect on activities. And other than that, I crave action, so I'm always going and going. But I also like to stay balanced, where people can be very productive or they can be very organized, and I try to balance one productivity activity with a maintenance activity, making sure I keep all my ducks in a row, but then I'm out earning my keep for the company.
Mm-hmm. Love it. Now, do you write you actually write or you type?
No, I write. I'm manual. I believe the whole business can be run without a computer, so I'm old school, and
Wow.
you know that. So.
Nice. I love it. All right. So, Steve, is there one thing that surprised you during your last year of practicing or implementing Lean?
It's unfortunately with my experience of being with 10 different businesses and 9 different industries over the last 23 years, nothing really surprises me anymore. I've seen it all before. What surprises me is my stamina to keep going. And there's days I just decide I just need to quit this and go find something else to do, because there's times where it can be very frustrating. But my heart's here. So I guess if it's surprising me about me, it's the fact that I can stay focused, and having a heart for people keeps me coming back to work every day. Love
it. All right. So do you have a routine or ritual that you follow when things aren't going well and you need to recharge and refocus?
Yeah, I'm a very self-reflective person, so I find that if things aren't going well, I tend to internalize them on myself. So that can be kind of destructive mode if you allow it to take hold of you. So stepping away from the process and looking at it from the outside. One of my senseis taught me about, and this is somewhat unique, and I'm sure there's interpretations of it, but you take time to be in the system, and you also take time to be on the system. So in the system, when you're executing your standards work, you got your nose in the business, and you're just really executing a process. But being on the system is stepping outside and watching the process, saying, hey, how did that process go? How do I improve that system? And it's a real systems view. So when I'm finding and not making progress, I'll step away and kind of look at the whole and say, am I coming from the right direction? Am I taking the right approach? Is there a different way to come about this? And that kind of gets me recentered. And then I'll dip into some of my learnings I've had along the way, and then kind of reflect on that to make sure I'm holding tight to the philosophies and principles I've been taught.
Mm. Now, you've got 20 plus years of experience, so it's definitely not your first rodeo. But I'm curious, is there an area, a skill area, or a knowledge area that you feel that you need to improve in order to become more successful at practicing Lean?
Yeah, it's funny. After 23 years, I feel like I don't know anything, and you're always learning. But one thing I've really focused on, and I'm translating that to the organization, is coaching kata.
Mm-hmm.
Really tightening up that, and like I said, coming from typically distressed organizations where I had to have all execute, you tend to go out to the shop floor, and the first thing to do, hey, here's what we should do here, and what you've done is rob that person of the opportunity to learn. And so working on my coaching, kind of leading with questions, observing first, and generally being quiet and watching, and then offering coaching through a question rather than an answer. So really get into that and really focusing on that mantra, doing my kata. And it sounds like after 20 years you should know this, but you build habits over time and they need to be broken. So that's something I'm trying, and as a leader, I need to demonstrate that if I expect my reports to execute the same way.
Yeah, that whole concept of solving people's problems, we call it stealing their monkey. The monkey on their back. So stop stealing people's monkey.
Right, exactly, exactly.
So yeah. I do have one other question for you, and I'm especially interested with your experience and your background. If you could go back in time, you jump into a time machine and go back 23 years and talk to Steve right before you kind of begin this journey.
Yeah.
Is there any advice you would give Steve, or would you just say, go get him, killer, and good luck?
Well, that's hard to say, because I wouldn't be what I am without going through what I went through. Right.
Exactly.
But I would, I had the hero syndrome where I thought I can fix this. Yeah. And what I found is that I can't fix executives. And what I needed to do is choose my companies wisely, and pick companies that have a good leadership approach, that are committed to the journey, and that are going to listen to coaching, especially from those who don't rank as high as them. I imagine, as you get into the C-level suite, you're talking guys who have been, they tend to have egos and they don't want to be told that they're doing it wrong.
Yeah.
So, you're making sure that you're connected with a good leadership team that's going to help you learn and grow. And I may not have worked in 10 different businesses, so I maybe worked in one or two.
Yeah.
So,
Okay.
and my wife would probably appreciate that more than anything else, not having to move and change jobs regularly.
Yeah. All right. Well, Steve, I really enjoy talking with you. It's always great to talk to folks like yourself who, truly living the lean way of life and practicing it and doing great work. So why don't we wrap the show up with you sharing some final words of wisdom, and then why don't you tell people how they can connect with you?
Certainly, I always pick up nuggets of wisdom along the way, and I've always had great leaders along the way. One thing I was taught is don't let best get in the way of better. Right. So, we tend to want to design the perfect system, but do is move the ball down the field towards the goal. And sometimes, it's best to just let's get a little bit better now. We go to the threshold of knowledge, and then we'll reevaluate when we get there. So that's something I try to live by to keep you centered and not get too wound up in perfection. But if you want to talk more, you can find me on LinkedIn. My contact information is there, both email and cell phone, and I'm open to talk to anybody anytime. I enjoy discussing it. I especially enjoy hearty debate. So I take all comers. So I look forward to hearing from some folks.
So is it just Steve Stansberry then?
Yep, Steve Stansberry, and you'll find the Director of Operational Excellence for the Climate Control Group at LSB Industries. So if there's more than one Steve Stansberry out there, you'll find me with LSB Industries.
Okay. Yeah, and we'll go ahead and we'll link to all of your social media outlets there in our show notes, which you'll looking at our board here. It's going to be gembapodcast.com/5959. So we'll link to everything there. So Steve, thanks again for taking time out of your busy day. It's been awesome, and look forward to actually meeting you in person one day, maybe at a conference or something, and going out and talking shop.
Super. I really appreciate it, Ron. Thank you.
All right. Take care.
Thanks for listening to the Gemba Academy podcast. Now it's time to take a free, no strings attached, fully functional test drive of Gemba Academy's School of Lean and Six Sigma over at GembaAcademy.com. Gain immediate access to more than 500 Lean and Six Sigma training videos free of charge at GembaAcademy.com.